Talking to some of the best names in contemporary Christian music. This is the Hope FM Artist Interview.
And welcome to this week's episode of The Artist Interview, a podcast from Hope FM. And I'm so pleased to welcome Andy Chrisman to the show. Hey, Andy, how you doing?
Thank you, Gordon. I'm doing great. It's great to meet you. And man, I'm honored to have this conversation with you.
So if we rewind time even a bit before, so the band, just say it was 1999 to 2006. Have I got that right?
No, actually, quite a bit.
1990.
1990. Was when we officially started, right? So we even go back farther than that. So the four of us, that's why we're called For Him. There were four guys, and we actually met in a group prior to that, a group called Truth, who'd been around since the early 1970s. And Truth was basically an ensemble that toured all over the country and all over the U.S. In fact, the first year that we were together in that group, we did 345 shows that first year.
Whoa!
So right.
That's
in 3.5
incredible.
years. Yeah, in 3.5 years in that band together, we did 1,000 concerts. So Truth was just a breeding ground. We called it, and the owner of the group didn't really like this term, but we called it Christian Music Boot Camp. Because, if you're doing 300 plus shows a year, and we were our own crew, we set up and tore down all the gear and lights, and we're our own bus drivers and truck drivers. And I mean, it was a deep immersion into the touring world. And bands like Avalon came out of that. Natalie Grant came out of Truth. Yeah. There were loads of musicians. Mark Childers, who is the music director and bass player for Carrie Underwood, was in that group with me at the time, and eventually was the bass player for Him a little later on. Karen Fairchild, who was in Little Big Town, was in Truth. So I mean, just in scores of people. You can't turn on the CMAs or the Grammys without seeing one or two Truth members that got some time on the road. And then so in 1990. The record label that Truth was on signed us as an artist, the four guys, and we did our first album in 1990. Had 25, depending on which charts you look at, we had anywhere from 25 to 30 number one songs in Christian music. And probably the reason that your listeners today may not be familiar with For Him is because we really didn't travel and tour in Europe much, and that's one of the things that I regret. There were a handful of artists that I know did do a lot of European stops, but we just, for some reason, we didn't. We stayed in the U.S. I think it was because we had families and we toured so much in the U.S. that it was really hard for us to take a month and go out of the country and leave our wives and children behind. And
that makes a lot of sense. I would say that people in the studio did say, "Oh, For Him, oh, that's great." So it's not that you're unheard of this side of the pond, but you just didn't get to tour here.
We do. In fact, it's funny. I train a lot of worship leaders and I lead worship all across the U.S. and For Him roots run deep. I mean, there's a lot of people in their 30s and 40s that For Him was the band that they listened to in Christian music when they were growing up. And I kind of walked away from all of that in 2006 when we disbanded and all kind of went our separate ways to pursue other things. And I kind of laid those memories down for a little while. And it's been over the last 3 or 4 years that, man, God has really allowed us to connect with our fans again, and not just fans, but people whose lives were touched by our music, and it's part of their spiritual journey. It's been amazing to just hear testimonies of how some of our songs impacted people.
As I was doing research about you, I saw so much evidence of that. So many people saying, "This is the song that saved me. This is the song that I've never been able to look back from because it helped me change who I was." All that sort of stuff. Where obviously God ministered powerfully through the music, and I think that's exciting. The fruit that comes from it, and I've looked back on comments that were probably from about 2004 through to in the last year sort of thing, that people are commenting on things like your YouTube videos about this one's one of the ones that just was so powerful. And I listening to the tracks and seeing the comments that people make, there's obviously been a lot of fruit from your harvest, including people making commitments to become Christians for the very first time. Can we rewind your journey even further? How did you yourself become a Christian?
So I grew up in a quote unquote Christian home. My parents were both very involved in our church. I grew up in Waco, Texas, and we we went to church every Sunday. My dad was the head deacon at our church. My mom was a Sunday school teacher, and it was a very, very small church. Maybe I don't know that we ever had more than 100 people at a time in our church there in Central Texas. But I was at church every Sunday morning, every Wednesday night, every Sunday night, every time the doors were open, because my parents were so involved. We all had to go as a family, and I had a conversion experience when I was 11 years old. My older brother is a musician and a worship pastor, and he he led me to Christ in his car one night when I was 11 years old. And I'll never forget going back and telling my dad after that experience. And he kind of laughed and said, I guarantee you accepted Christ 100 times before that, but at least you have a time now where you can point to and say, I made the statement that Jesus is Lord of my life. So I can look back at a history and a family of faith that I grew up in and learned the Bible at an early age and was surrounded by the teachings of Jesus. And I'm glad that I have a point in time where I can look back and remember the words that I said at 11 years old and accepted Christ into my heart. So that was, I wouldn't say it was life changing. It wasn't like this incredible turnaround because it was basically just a decision for me. But I do look back at that point and realize that God had me on a journey. I was a singer. I had kind of an unusual gift even at a young age that people recognized at 10 or 11 years old. And then when I was 14, our church couldn't afford to pay a minister of music anymore. So they asked me if I would lead the hymn service, which was, back in the little Baptist church in Texas. That's all we sang were hymns back in the 1980s. And they paid me about $20 a week to lead the hymn service. And that's really how I started taking a step forward in music. I started learning how to read music out of a hymn book, thinking really quickly in my musical brain, and then just seeing the impact that these songs had on a congregation. And I knew from that point on that my career was going to be in music. I didn't know how, I didn't know where it was going to be. I didn't want to be a minister of music. That lifestyle did not appeal to me. But God really had his hand on my life and just kind of nudged me here and there to stay in the ministry and music. And 35, 40 years later, here I am still doing a lot of the same things I was doing when I was 12, 13, 14 years old.
Wow. What year was it then when you were 11 when you became a Christian? Or when you
So that
made
would have
that
been
definitive
probably
step?
1977, 1978.
Okay.
I'm 55 now, and I've had quite the journey.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned your age because after lots of interviews, we do get people going, well, how old was that person? Because they can't work it out from the voice on
Yeah.
the radio. So,
Yeah.
so yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
How did you actually manage in the middle of doing all these performances to also have time to feed? I don't mean physically, but I mean feed on God. How did you manage to receive to be able to give out rather than just drying up and burning out?
So, one good thing that we didn't have back then were cell phones or laptop computers or, do you remember the Game Boys, the first Game Boys? I mean,
I do,
those weren't
yeah.
even around back in those early days. And so those first 3.5 years of truth, when we were riding the bus 6 hours a day, there was nothing to do except listen to music, read your Bible, read books, and have conversations with each other. And I feel like so much of that is missing right now. There's that community aspect. And the same thing when we got on the For Him bus, it was, we had to, we had to be there for each other to survive. There was no checking out with different types of media. And I think that was one of the ways that we were able to stay maybe fresh a little bit because our hearts weren't cluttered with all of the media and stuff that we have now. But I will say, when you're in the grind, it's really hard to see God's hand on you when you're going from city to city to city to city to city. Even something as tremendous as singing before, 8 to 10,000 people a night. you don't really get to enjoy it because you're on the bus and on to the next city, and you're missing your family at home. And if you don't have a good support, like I never knew how solo artists did it. I and so many solo artists were the ones that were losing their marriages and were getting into trouble on the road. And we saw that firsthand. There was something about the four of us being together and being brothers and holding each other accountable and encouraging each other when we saw someone slipping into maybe some depression or getting into some, getting into some things they shouldn't be getting into. We could stop the bus right there and go, hey, let's figure this out. What's going on? It was a microcosm of a church, basically. We were there to help each other, but also keep each other accountable. And I think that's what probably kept us fresh for as long as we did. And we had a really good run. I mean, there are very few bands, even in Christian music, that the original members were able to stay together for as long as we did. And I think that's because we were honest with each other and we believed in each other.
How many years in total were you together then?
So just under 20 years. So
wow,
that's touring basically without a break. We've toured for 20 years really without a break. And we're still together. Technically, we're still together. We do at least one event a year. We do a golf pro-am in Florida every year. It's something that we've been a part of for the last 25 years. And that's always something we look forward to. And, we stay in contact. We just did a TV show for the TBN network here in the States. It was a Carmen tribute show after Carmen passed away. And they invited us in to sing a couple of songs on that broadcast. So that was fun to get back together again and do that. So I don't have an air date on that yet, but we still have little things that we do here and there together. And we still stay very, very close. We go to each other's churches. I've been to Mark Harris's church and Kirk Sullivan's church, quite a bit over the last few years and led worship with them. And so, to say that we were together for 20 years, yeah, in a very dense time, but we're still together in some way, and we always will be.
That I've got to say is absolutely beautiful, because it's sad. It is genuinely sad when amazing bands come to the end and they almost fall apart because the strain and the stress and everything's just ripped their relationships apart. But to hear how God's hand is still upon you and to hear that you're visiting each other's church and things, that is a real encouragement. But your story hasn't ended there, has it? So what have you been doing since you released Believe?
So I released Believe in 2004. And since then, I felt like I scratched that itch. Like I didn't feel like I was supposed to spend my time as a solo artist. I really believed that God had really from an early age shaped me to become a worship pastor and to lead people in worship. And the difference was in my Truth and For Him days, I was singing to people about God. The subtle shift was now I'm supposed to sing with people to God. And it sounds like a simple thing, but it was massive for me, to where I just wanted to point people to Jesus and get out of the way. So all of that and all of those, I would say, we estimate that we did maybe 5,000 concerts together between Truth and For Him in those 20 years. And I took that experience of being on stage and being in the studio, really loving great, beautiful music and art. And I felt like God had really spoken to my heart to say, bring the art back to the church. The artists have left the church to go do their own thing, but I want art back in the church. And you've seen since the early 2000s how worship has exploded. Matt Redmond and Delirious and Chris Tomlin and Hillsong, and all of that began to start to be birthed in the early 2000s. And so I knew that I had heard correctly from God. So I helped a friend of mine start a church in Orlando, Florida in 2000. So I kind of did double duty. I was on the road with For Him and at my church every Sunday morning, which that's a crazy story in itself. I never missed a Sunday morning with all of the traveling in 5 years of being at that church in Orlando. And so I knew God was with me in that. But then at some point, it just got to be too much. I knew I couldn't do both. And my wife and I just began to pray. My son was about to be a teenager, and I was just gone too much. I was too busy. I knew I had to give one of those things up. And after I prayed that prayer, a pastor friend from Tulsa, Oklahoma called me from Church on the Move, which at the time was a church of about 10 to 12,000 people. And he said, I really am interested in you coming here to be our worship pastor. And so we knew that was God. That answered all of our prayers concerning our family and where I knew my career was supposed to go. So we packed up in Florida and moved to Oklahoma. And I've been here for 16 years. My
16 years.
Yes, 16 years. Both of my children are married now. I have 5 grandchildren, and we love it here. This is our home. And I was on staff full time at Church on the Move in Tulsa for 15 years. And God spoke to my heart at the beginning of 2020 to say it's time to step away, continue to lead worship, but now take all of this leadership and all of this knowledge that you have over the past 35 years and take it to as many people who need it. And so right now, I go to churches across the country. In fact, I was at 2 different churches this week, one in Las Vegas, another one in St. Louis, and just helping them, coaching their worship leaders, coaching their vocalists, helping their pastors to figure out how to put the right leadership team together for worship. That's just all that stuff in my wheelhouse. And I'm just happy to give it to as many people as possible. And then one thing that God dropped in my life about 15 years ago that we're still doing is my radio show called Worship with Andy Chrisman. And it is now, because of Hope FM, on 430 stations around the world in at least 13 countries. And it's just been one of those things that, again, it's just, I feel like God winking at me, just going, I'm going to put you in a place where you never thought you would be. And that's the opportunity to speak into the lives of about 5 to 7 million people every weekend, play music that brings them hope, and just continue to push modern worship forward and introduce people to music that they may not know exist and be listening to. And to me, worship is what we're created to do. Music is a language of heaven. If you read the Bible or you read any books that are written about heaven, you know that music is not only an integral part of heaven, I believe it's a language of heaven. And that's why music does something to our spirits. It doesn't just make us feel good. It goes down deep. Songs have a spiritual effect on us. And that's because we're connecting with something that's beyond. And I just believe that worship is that great marriage of our expression of music and the expression of music in heaven. And it's something we'll do for all eternity. So I believe worship music should be amazing, should be well written, should be fun to listen to, and should point us ultimately to Jesus. And I'm just so grateful to be in the seat that I'm in right now. Do I get to lead worship? I get to coach worship, and I get to bring worship to millions of people around the world every week.
It's an amazing thing to have happened, to be able to actually communicate through songs and to that sort of audience. What a joy. What an extraordinary thing for God to have opened up for you. And in some ways, well, because of your heritage, where you've come through musically, it also gives you opportunity as well to highlight, showcase, and talk to people who are be on the journey that you've been on, but now in the new wave of it, as it were, and still pressing forwards and capturing more of what God's got for us. Because one of the things you mentioned is you believe there's always more, and you saw this person reading their Bible and laughing and weeping over it. And I think that was really poignant, because no matter what place we are with God, there is always more. And I certainly, for me, worship music is something that I absolutely love, and I will stick worship music on, and it is one of the things that can change the atmosphere as well. If you're in a place where you haven't got your eyes set on Jesus and things around you are all looking bleak, actually putting on some music that just refocuses you on Jesus can set a fire in your heart, can't it?
That's right. Amen, brother.
So if you were only able to listen to 3 artists for the rest of your life, which 3 artists, and it's the music they've already done now, plus the music that they're going to release into the future, which obviously at the moment you don't know what it is, so you've got to trust them a lot. What 3 artists would you choose?
Wow. So you're going to see a different side of me here, because none of these are going to be Christian artists. So
it's the musicality.
Yeah, it's the musicality. And again, I believe, like I said earlier, I believe music is a language of heaven, and not everyone knows how to direct that gift back to God. But I do believe that great music that moves us is a clue that God has his hand in this. So my number one band of all time is Tears for Fears. They're my favorite band since I was, 14, 15, 16 years old. Just love everything they do. I've seen them in concert twice. Roland Orzabal is one of my favorite vocalists of all time. He's just kind of a cornerstone vocalist for me that I love to emulate. Um, then I would say Kenny Loggins after that is number two for me, and I've seen him several times. I know several members of his band, so I've gotten to meet him a couple of times, and that's been really cool. And he's just as a vocalist, as an artist, I light up with him. Like I'm like that's the kind of vocal I love right there. And what's crazy is I actually pray for these people. Like I want these people to be in heaven. I don't know if they've had an experience with Jesus or not, but I don't want these guys to miss out on heaven because I want to jam with them when I get up there. That's kind of something I'm looking forward to, is these people that I've looked up to and love their music. I want them to be in heaven so I can spend some time with them musically. And then number three, I'll just say this. I'll say the Imperials. I'll throw in a Christian band there. In fact, just yesterday I was in the gym and I put on the One More Song for You album. And that was just such a seminal album in my musical journey. Those early, I would say the Imperials from 1978 to about 1984, 85, or maybe the late 80s, that band, everything they put out was just like, okay, I want to do this. I feel like there's something there for me. And what was really, really cool, Gordon, was about 5 years ago, we did a showcase. It was called CCM. I believe it was CCM 35 years of CCM. So it's basically a celebration of 35 years of Christian music. I think it's 35. And it was all these classic artists. Amy Grant was there. Michael W. Smith was there. Love Song was there. One of the very first groups. Evie was there. And then we were very privileged to be a part of the artists that were there, but we shared a dressing room with that original Imperials group of the early 1980s. I have pictures of it. I even took the signage off of the door that said dressing room reserved for the Imperials and for him.
Wow.
And I was like, this has come full circle. God, thank you for this, because I'm able to literally sit down with those four guys and say, you're the reason I'm doing what I do. You are one of the biggest reasons, because of the music and the passion and just the love you have for what you do. You're a big influence on me. And because of that, you've had a hand in all of the people that we've reached since.
That is just beautiful to get that opportunity to say that. Absolutely. I can't imagine how exciting that moment was. And nice. Have you still got the sign that you peeled off the door?
I do. Yeah. You want to see it?
Yeah, go on.
Okay. I'm going to grab
it. How cool is that? Dressing room number 10. So for those people just listening, that is a nice little memento it's got left. For those people who are watching the video, of course, you just got to see it anyway. But I can imagine, looking around your room, I can see there's various things stuck up on the walls there, gold discs and all the rest of it. But you won numerous awards when you were in For Him, and obviously you've moved on from being focused on all that production side of things. What are the treasures that you're going for these days?
That's a really great question, Gordon. I'm glad you asked that. There was a time that I put all of those awards away in a closet. If you can't see the other side of my office, but I've got all my number one plaques from For Him, and I've got, just all these awards and Grammy nominations and everything, just all the way around. And I put them up for a while. It wasn't that I was embarrassed by them. Obviously I wasn't, but I felt like I needed to move on to something new, that I didn't want to look back as I was going forward. But then several years ago, as I told you earlier, I started getting messages from fans on how important For Him was in their journey. And I just felt like God say, enjoy that. Enjoy what I did. Put those back up in your office. Be reminded that I was with you and did something awesome through you guys. And don't look at it as something I accomplished, but look at it as something as I accomplished with God, that we did this together. And each one of them tells a story. So each one of these gold and platinum records and #1 plaques, and I've got something over here from NASA that I got to be a part of after the Columbia.
You got to tell me, yeah, what did
disaster.
you do? Oh gosh.
Well, I was living in Orlando at the time, and when Columbia exploded on takeoff back in the early 2000s, obviously that was a real tragedy. And I was serving at my church in Orlando, and I got a call from a pastor friend of mine who is actually a chaplain at NASA. And he called just a couple of days after that happened and said, hey, we're doing a family only and employee only service on the tarmac where the Columbia shuttle would have landed. Will you come sing and lead worship? And I was like, of course I will. Wow. So went out there. It was one of the most poignant moments in my career. And I was able to sing a little song I had written at the time, and sing Where There Is Faith, There Is a Voice Calling, Keep Walking, You're Not Alone in This World. That I really felt like some of these songs were written for that moment in a crazy way. And so they sent me some really beautiful pictures and memorabilia of the crew that we were able to honor that day. And so I have things like that are just kind of scattered throughout my office. And again, just reminds me that if God was with me then, He's with me now, and there's more to come.
You've been watching The Artist Interview. For the full podcast, click the links below or visit hopefm.com/The Artist Interview.